Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Yeah, usually when you hear somebody's living a double life, man, it's usually not a good thing. It is for this guy because he lived a double life. He is a prominent architect in the New York City area. Mr. John Riggio is back with us on the program, but his double life was the beginning of, I guess, his career, but it wasn't architecture. It was a tennis pro back when he was in his early 20s. And that's what we've been talking about. We're going to pick up where we left off last week as John joins us. Hey, John, how are you?
Good, Steve. How are you?
Doing very well. There, just amazing stories and flashbacks as you worked with, played alongside some of the greatest players, and still are some of the greatest players on the planet. Some of the, not just tennis, but sports figures. Even before we dig in, now at one point you played. Did you play alongside or against John McEnroe?
Yes. So during this time, when I was playing at the SUNY Westbury campus and with the Ross Perot Company, setting up that whole tennis area, there's a series of ATP tennis tournaments I played. And one tournament was called the ABN ATP tournament. It's an expensive tournament. It's $50,000 to enter into this tournament.
Wow.
I played all the top players, and I was able to win this tournament. One player that was there that I haven't talked about playing him was John McEnroe. He's a well-known player in the area, and of course, he was sponsored by the same pro shop as myself. So we had a very nice game. It was a clean match. And but I was able to win the match, and that helped me advance, and I won that whole tournament. There was a very nice cash prize, and the sponsors received a large trophy for that. So that was really big. But one thing about John McEnroe that I was willing to give him credit for was at that time, like they were saying, I only lost one match in 36, one match in 34, and then like one match in 60, and then I didn't really lose too many matches. He was one match that he did win earlier in that year. I played him early in the year, and he did win a match in one of the tournaments. It was an ATP tournament, and he did win the match against me. And one interesting thing was in that tournament, the next opponent that he played, that I didn't see him play the other opponent, but I was told somehow he disqualified himself from playing. He was disqualified from the game and disqualified from the tournament, and that allowed me to advance. I was able to still advance. I didn't have to lose a tournament, and I eventually won that tournament. I won every match after that.
Wow.
I won the whole tournament, and that was really big. And then maybe 2-3 months later, I was able to play John McEnroe again in this ABN tournament. And I plugged a couple of holes when I was playing him. He was hitting the ball to my left side very hard and fast on a short hit. So I had to really run over and hit the ball, and I hit the ball all the way across the court to the opposite corner, and he wasn't able to get the ball. And the same thing was happening on the right side of the court. He had another shot that he was using previously to me, and I plugged the hole on that, and I was able to hit the ball past him on the right side of the court. So he doing that, I was able to really win the game and kept up all the best playing that I had, like acing my opponent when I serve and things like that. And so that's how I was able to win. But he turned out to be one of the only ones that beat me that whole span of 8 months or more. So that was interesting. In fact, that game, since he was disqualified, that game was sort of didn't really count at that point because he left the whole tournament. But I think we just kept it in there that it was considered one win anyway. But that was always good to point out that he was what was happening, and that was very interesting.
John, when you talk about the competitions, and I've always wondered about this, so maybe in the tennis world we could clarify it. There's all different matches. You got Wimbledon, the U.S. Open. Insert the name of another match. How come you see some players playing, this match, Wimbledon, you might not see him at the U.S. Open? How does it all work?
Yes, what happens with the tournaments, there's a few different factors involved in playing the tournaments. One of them, usually a series of tournaments you might play. And when I first started off in the top group, a lot of them used to like to play Wimbledon, the French Open, the Lavender Cup, and the Davis Cup and the US Open. So they were really concerned with just those few tournaments. They weren't playing all the tournaments.
Right.
Now, one interesting thing about, say, if I was to play any particular tournament, if I was even to participate in the tournament, going to the finals, I could win the whole tournament, but they wouldn't give me the trophy. I still would not win the trophy for the tournament. I wouldn't win any prize. And the reason is because at that point, a lot of people never get to this point, but you have to still qualify to really obtain the trophy and the prize and everything like that. You might have to, there are certain requirements of maybe living in the country. You might even have to become a citizenship of the country that you're playing in, like Rebecca. So each tournament, if you wanted to win on the domestic track, a lot of people, when they read different magazines, a lot of times the domestic track gets a lot of attention. It isn't the only track. It's usually the international track has more players in it. The domestic track, a lot of times they're more interested in it, but to really obtain the trophy and award at the domestic track, you might have to live in their country. And when I was playing some of these tournaments, when I won the tournament, there was always this thing of really qualifying as far as living in their country. I would have to live in the country between 3 years, maybe as much as 9 years. Some tournaments I'd have to become a citizen of their country. I would have to leave the USA, become a citizen of their country. A lot of people don't know that is really the rules. I think there are some people, like a lot of people with like a British passport can get to a lot of different countries. They sort of have an advantage with that, and they don't have a problem with having to go to every country. So that's one example.
So when we talk about Wimbledon, do you have to live in the UK, or could you have dual citizenship? I have no idea how that works, but I was never aware. I just thought if you build yourself up in certain rankings that you can play in these different tournaments.
Yes. For instance, things like Wimbledon, there are very strict requirements of Wimbledon. A lot of people don't know that. There is another tournament in Britain called the London Queen's Tournament. I won that tournament on international track. There are still requirements with that tournament. So the win, I kept on the international track, but there are certain requirements for that, not as strict as Wimbledon. And I think one tournament I won that I was able to keep on the domestic track was called the Paris Burke in France. They did not bother me about that I would have to live in France or become a citizen in France. And although one of the players that his party of people that he was playing, like his coach and sponsors, I think they saw like an opening that if they can protest me winning the Paris Burke, he would win the Paris Burke instead, on the domestic track.
Give me that again.
In fact, they did not win. They did not win the plea. They set a plea in to try to do that to me, but they didn't bother with it. So that particular one, and that's why I had a billboard over there.
Wow.
In Paris, France, which is very nice. They didn't say anything about that. So that I won the international and the domestic on that. That was very good.
So somebody could protest you playing in a tournament, and that could stick?
And that can happen after you win the tournament too.
Wow. Has that in recent memory? I know that you're plugged into the tennis world even now, decades later. Have you ever heard of that ever happening?
I think there could be a protest after a match or after a tournament, provided they find something wrong, that there was some impropriety.
Okay.
I think the only problem with the things with that you are a citizen of a country or you would have to live in the country, is sort of another requirement they have, but no one really knows about it. I think a lot of people play the tournaments, but they might never win them. And since I was winning these big tournaments, I was finding out about things like this, and that was very interesting. So I think after playing the tournaments, you probably would figure that if I had to become a citizen or live in a country to play Wimbledon, I probably wouldn't bother play it at all. I mean, since I would play it and have a chance of really winning the tournament, I just wouldn't bother play that tournament at all. Now I was playing the preliminaries in the ATP Tour to get into all those things like Wimbledon, French Open, different tournaments of Laver Cup also, and now I was on track to play any of them, but I think as time went on with my career, I ended up playing some other tournaments they had. That the one tournament I saw at Roland Garros was one where I would have to go there in person. That year was in Spain to play that tournament, but very possibly they wouldn't bother me with living there. That one, although I didn't really get to that point, but that is one idea. And so there are all those different types of tournaments. A lot of those things don't come up until you really win the tournament. There's no way to really figure that out. That was really something that has to do with experience and really having the ability to win the whole tournament, to find out that you would really have to live there, become a citizen of the country to win on the domestic track.
Wow. It's interesting to hear you say, John, that if you had to become a citizen of a different country to play at Wimbledon, even though you love tennis, I mean, tennis is your life, and especially back then, that you wouldn't do it. So I have to believe that you feel, strong about being a U.S. citizen, that would not even break you. Is that really the reason why that you wouldn't become a citizen of that country to play in that match?
I think for some players that would be like a debate you'd have to take, that if you want to really get recognition of winning a big tournament on the domestic, where they would make a big thing about it, but that would involve maybe leaving the U.S., becoming a citizen of another country. You'd become an expatriate here. And that would be a big problem. I don't think every country would allow a dual citizenship. So that is a big decision to have to do that. I think some players have done things like that. They have left the U.S. and become citizens of other countries after they won the match. And they don't really say that is the reason why in the newspaper, but that is a real requirement to really obtain the trophy and get the prize money and the recognition for a domestic win would very possibly involve moving to another country and becoming a citizen of another country and leaving the U.S. That's very big, and they don't talk about that at all, but that is a very serious thing. I think going as far as, like I was talking about, playing the ATP Tour is very good because all the players get to play the ATP Tour and they can really get their ranking going up or down, and you get an idea of all the different people's around the world, how they play. And that's why when I was explaining about obtaining the top spot in playing tennis was something I was able to achieve. And what happened is there was a set of players from Portugal, and I played a tournament against them at Sutton East. They all came to Sutton East. They played me in an international tournament, and I was able to win the tournament. But what happened during that tournament was very interesting. They had an idea that I was the number one player, and when they were asking me questions about who I won, which is like I'd explained about checking out like who's the top 5 players. They asked me if I had beat the number one player from Israel. He is like the excellent player. He was number one player from Israel, and he was the really only team player from Israel. But one thing interesting about him, but before he lived in Israel, he was really from Russia, and he's the number one player in Russia. Russia's big with sports. So he had a lot of prestige coming from Russia as number one player, Israel number one player. Now he's living in the U.S., and when I was able to tell them that I had already beat him and surpassed him, they didn't disagree that I wasn't the number one player also. And so during this tournament, there was this one match that was a really big match. I was playing one of their players, and all my sponsors came there, and my fan club was there. And I played this match, and I did win the match. and it was a really big thing. And I did get the international win on that. I think with that is the same situation. I was given the award for an international win on that tournament.
Wow. What a life. What a lifestyle back then. And I know that there was a time that you were involved in getting cars. I know there was one point where you had a really impressive Mercedes. I think the value of it back then, and you were in your low 20s, you told us, it was like 50K Mercedes. Back then, that was a lot of money for a car. I think even a $20,000 car back then, if I remember correctly, you know, we were talking like the mid 80s around there. How about some other cars that you might have been driving, exotic cars, you know, that they spiffed you with? Anything that you remember?
Yes. Well, I think starting with that black Mercedes, it was $50,000 for them to lease it for 6 months. So that was a very expensive car. And then as I progressed and got more experience, I was at the SUNY Westbury campus. And the one thing about that is when I drive into the campus, everyone can see me drive and park the car. And then this issue came up again about me really having an exotic car. I already had like a nice American car. I had a Chrysler Laser sports car. And I even had this MGB convertible I used to drive there on the weekend. And but they would talk to me and they said, that isn't exotic enough. I mean, I really need like really expensive like black Mercedes. They were suggesting maybe like getting like a Bugatti, you know, type car, really expensive car. So they can match the $26.5 million contract with my car and driving it when they see it. But this was a little problem at that time. It was a little early. I think you know, it was sort of like a home problem, and you know, putting the Bugatti in the driveway and where I was living. So it was a little early for that, I think. But they were trying to push that on me. They were hoping I can just go out and buy one somehow. And this was another thing.
So,
this was another thing. Like finding an agent was another thing to get into really getting some kind of car like this, and it was a little early to do it.
let me figure this out. Now they're telling you, John, or whatever tennis name you were using at that time, you got to get an exotic car. It doesn't look cool enough when you roll into the stadium. We need something that's more flashy. Are they telling you, go get a better car? Or are they saying, we got to get you a better car? You got to look better than that. How did that, which way
they're
did it go?
going is they're suggesting if I get a better car, it's going to put me in a place that's really more exclusive. I'm going to be with a group of people that are much more exclusive, and it's going to help my career.
Wow.
They're doing it to help me. And of course the sports photographers might take a couple of pictures of me. They were taking pictures of me in my other car anyway. It was good enough to take pictures of it, but they really was suggesting that to help me out, to really find a safe location where I'm really more with people who have a really large contract like that. They're really successful in sports and entertainment, and that is where I was with that.
Wow. So when they suggested that you change it up and get a more exotic car, did you? Or you just said, you know, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing?
I know I didn't really get to bother with the exotic car yet. I didn't really get to that yet. And I think before that was really just to start off. When I was in high school and just turned 18, I think they were suggesting for me to buy a Volvo. This was a tennis car, was a Volvo car, even buying like a used one. Because when it comes to the Volvo, they were advertising a lot in tennis. I think they were even supporting some players in tennis. So this was another tennis car, but that was another one. The Volvo was not going over good at home, getting the Volvo. It wasn't that expensive a car. It's just like a regular car, just different brand.
Now, when you say
that wasn't going over very good at home. So
when you say at home,
idea didn't go ahead.
When you say at home, do you mean friends, family, parents,
with the family?
Why didn't they like the Volvo? What's wrong? What's wrong with that car?
I don't know why. I don't know why it was some reason the Volvo idea didn't go ahead, but that wasn't the initial suggestion was to get the Volvo was more like the tennis player car. And that was something interesting.
Wow. Well, okay, so wait, let me make sure that I'm understanding this or not. That you got a tennis player's car, Volvo, but others weren't into that car and didn't think you should be driving it.
That's correct. Yes,
Huh.
even though, for instance, the home situation, even though if I explained the Volvo was a car I needed to show I'm playing pro tennis, for some reason it wasn't good, and I didn't go ahead with the Volvo, so I didn't bother with it.
I can tell you, when I was 19, I would take any car at that time and inherited or was given my dad's Delta 88, like this big boat with wheels on it, and happily took it. So, I mean, if you could get a car, how interesting the whole, the perception of the players, the stigmatism to the players. It's the whole. I mean, I guess this is what it comes down to sports. It's the image you put out there, you know?
Yes.
Hmm. What about Ross Perot? Now I know that you were part of his team at one point, and then he had a stadium, or he was going to build a stadium, or put his name on a stadium. How did that all go down?
Yes, what happened is the stadium is really isn't part of the contract sale. The stadiums and the tennis centers were really another factor in assets that can be sold separately. But the the plans and the construction had already started on the stadium. But when my contract was bought over, the Ross company didn't want to go ahead with completing the stadium. They were aware of the stadium. They could go ahead with it. They didn't bother with it. They're more interested in playing outdoors or playing in a tennis center. It wasn't really something that was really urgent for them to go ahead with doing this. And I think the same thing happened with the team from Japan. The investors from Japan, they didn't go ahead with completing the stadium either. They weren't too concerned with it. So
Wow.
that's the status of what happened with the stadium. But they were fully aware that there was a stadium and it could be completed. But at that point, they just decided not to go ahead with the stadium. And the Ross Perot company, of course, bought over a tennis country club on the north side of Long Island in Nassau County. And it is they went ahead with that idea instead, and
Hmm.
that's what happened. But they did buy a tennis center, so that was good. They just didn't leave, and that worked out pretty good.
Where was that stadium going to be? The Ross Perot Stadium, if it was going to take place, where was that? Was on Long Island, New York area?
That was in the Polo Grounds in Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
There are these 5 locations in Manhattan where they had stadiums called the Polo Grounds, and they were building on one of those 5 stadiums. That's where the new stadium was going to get located.
How would that have impacted you if that stadium was built or named under Ross Perot?
I think that would work pretty good. Yeah, I think that
Hmm.
was sort of like some permanence. The Sutton East was a good permanent location. I think that was good, and I think yeah, I think that is a good idea. I think this thing with the stadiums and everything is a little controversial, but since they were already building the stadium, there's nothing wrong with it. They was going to have all the different facilities there as far as using tennis courts and like lockers, facilities, things like that.
Hmm. Wow. Uh, just like fascinating history coming out of all of this, and it doesn't matter where you live in the country, just hearing all these players, and it's almost like we pull the curtain away from what goes on in professional sports and kind of see, how things are manipulated, massaged, moved around for players. It's pretty fascinating, the images and everything. Um, you were at this point, let's say in your mid 20s or approaching your mid 20s, you were starting down the career path to become an architect. Is that right?
Yes, I always had the idea of having the architect profession, and this could supplement my playing. Of course, the tennis playing, there was no idea of how long I would play tennis, when it would end, and if the money would really be coming in from tennis, and that's why the whole thing with the architect profession went ahead and it continued on. And they always encouraged that. They encouraged all the players to get like a college education and have an extra career on the side, that they could always get extra money on the side. They'd have financial stability, and they don't have to concern themselves too much with the problems with getting earnings from tennis.
I think guess it's always have a backup plan, and especially I guess if you got to a certain level within a sport, let's say tennis, that endorsements would come after that. But you get to a certain level, maybe you didn't reach that point, and then it kind of changed, and then you pivoted to architecture. So you had a plan B.
Well, there's a very interesting thing about the tennis earnings. I think I had discussed on the last show that there is an option to get a yearly salary, but that yearly salary, I think a lot of people would be surprised, is really only $16,000 a year. And but that gives you a stability where the earnings you would make are not coming, they're not really big superstar earnings like I was already taking out of my account. These were just very low earnings. But a lot of people that you wouldn't believe, I don't want to say the names, a lot of the players were really going for the $16,000 a year, and they just kept their side job because this gave them a little stability where they're sort of like just like working the ATP tour for a minimum dollars, and the amount of money that they would get, they're not going to really ever cash in on that money. Now, I was a player, was a little different. I was a little more like a superstar player. They liked this idea of me really taking out like $150,000 a year. This was really big, having like entertainment wife. And they really liked this idea, and this was the plan. It was going ahead. It was going ahead. That year, I got the payout of the $125,000, and then what happened was that particular year, I exposed that there was some players that had corrupt coaches that stole one or more tournaments. Now, from that being exposed, and my lawyer and my sponsors going and really going after them, they were able to get the winnings from one or more tournaments, and it equaled a lot of money, maybe $200,000 or more in cash. And what that did was that gave me a bonus of $25,000 for that year of 1991 and 1992, and that leveled off my income as a player for $400,000 a year.
Wow!
But suddenly, I was making $300,000 a year. So at this point, going from 1991 to 1992, my player salary for the year is $400,000.
Amazing.
So that is good.
And again, I just have to say it. Back then, if now that's a lot of money. Look back then, it was like double that amount. Just amazing. We're out of time, but I want to tell everybody that if you're looking for a guy that's going to take care of any kind of design work in terms of architecture, whether it's your business, your house, or renovation, or starting from the ground up, here's the website. John Riggio, RIGGIO.com is where you can find John. And also on the website is some of the memorabilia and flashbacks from his tennis career. Just fascinating. John, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it today.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.